This is the Extreme Long Range Qualification Platform. The civilian recreational range is about 2 miles back toward the main gate. The voice was young, earnest, and laced with the kind of polite condescension a man uses when he's certain he's correcting a harmless error. Corporal Davis of the 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion gestured vaguely with a hand clad in a tactical glove, his state-of-the-art Barrett M107A1 slung casually over his shoulder. His fire team, a trio of 20-somethings with sculpted physiques and haircuts you could set a watch to, mirrored his expression of bemused patience. They saw a woman who looked like she could be their grandmother, with silver-gray hair pulled back in a tight practical bun and fine lines etched around her eyes and mouth. She wore faded denim jeans, sturdy hiking boots, and a simple, threadbare field jacket that had seen better decades. The only thing that seemed out of place was the long, heavy rifle case she carried with an ease that belied its obvious weight. The woman, Alara Finch, offered a small, placid smile. "I believe I'm in the right place, Corporal." Her voice was quiet, yet it carried a strange resonance in the open desert air, cutting through the low whine of the wind. Davis exchanged a look with his lance corporal, a smirk playing on the younger Marine's lips. "With all due respect, ma'am, we're shooting out to 2,000 meters today. This isn't for plinking with a .22. He eyed the case. It was old wooden, reinforced with brass at the corners, and covered in the scuffs and scars of a long, hard life. It looked like something you'd find in a dusty attic or a museum exhibit on the Great War. Alara didn't seem to notice the snickers rippling through the small group. She simply knelt, her movements fluid and economical, and unlatched the case. The Marines leaned in, their curiosity piqued. Inside, nestled in worn, deep blue velvet, was a rifle that drew a collective, stifled laugh from the young men. It was a monster of a weapon, but it looked ancient. The stock was a single piece of dark, polished walnut, smooth from a century of handling. The barrel was long and impossibly thick, a bull barrel of blued steel that had lost some of its luster. The action was a simple, massive bolt, but it was the scope that truly dated it. A long brass tube with external adjustment knobs the size of dimes, it lacked the digital readouts, illuminated reticles, and tactical rails of their modern optics. "Whoa," one of the Marines whispered, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Did you borrow that from Daniel Boone?" Davis, trying to regain a semblance of military courtesy, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, that's a beautiful antique, but it's not safe for the pressures of modern Magnum loads. We can't have that thing coming apart on the line." From the small RSO tower overlooking the firing line, Gunnery Sergeant Reyes watched the interaction through his binoculars. He'd seen the old woman arrive in a dusty 20-year-old pickup truck and had been about to radio down to have her redirected. But something stopped him. It wasn't her appearance, but her bearing. Her back was ramrod straight. Her head was on a constant, subtle swivel, her eyes taking in the wind direction from the flags, the heat mirage shimmering off the baked earth, the position of the sun. It was an unconscious environmental scan he'd only ever seen in seasoned operators. Now, watching her on his optics, he saw her hands as she rested them on the old rifle. They were wrinkled, yes, but they were absolutely, preternaturally still. There was no tremor, no hesitation. There was a quiet, deep-seated competence in that stillness. Reyes lowered his binoculars, a knot of intrigue tightening in his gut. He decided to let it play out. Alara ran a gentle hand along the walnut stock, her expression unreadable. "She's handled much worse than a hot day in the desert, Corporal," she said, her voice still soft. "She and I are cleared for this range. If you'll check with your range safety officer, you'll find my name on the roster, Alara Finch." Davis, flustered but bound by protocol, keyed his radio. "Tower, this is Recon 1. Got a civilian on the line, name of Finch. Can you confirm she's cleared for, extreme long range?" He said the last part with a heavy dose of skepticism. The reply came back, colored by Gunny Reyes' own curiosity. "Affirmative, Recon 1. Ms. Finch is cleared for all distances, up to and including the 5,000-meter contingency target." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. The 5,000-meter target wasn't a real target. It was a ludicrously distant steel plate, nearly 3 miles away, set up for testing new sensor equipment and occasionally for artillery spotters. Hitting it with a rifle was considered a statistical impossibility, a joke among snipers. The fact that this old woman was cleared for it was so absurd that the Marines didn't know how to react. Davis slowly lowered his radio, his face a canvas of confusion. He looked at the woman, then at her ancient rifle, and back again. The gentle grandmotherly image was starting to crack, and he didn't like the uncertainty that was replacing it. He simply nodded stiffly. "All right then, find a spot, man. The range goes hot in 5. He and his team moved away, whispering among themselves. They set up their own stations with practiced efficiency, unboxing their high-tech rifles, plugging in their ballistic computers, and setting up their spotting scopes. Their gear was a symphony of modern warfare: carbon fiber, advanced polymers, and sophisticated electronics. Alara's setup was, by contrast, a study in simplicity. She laid out a simple canvas shooting mat. She produced a small, leather-bound notebook and a pencil. She pulled a single, enormous brass cartridge from a worn leather pouch and chambered it with a smooth, solid clack of the bolt. The round was a custom-loaded .50 caliber, but longer and heavier than the standard BMG rounds the Marines used. It was a Wildcat cartridge, something designed for one rifle and one purpose. Gunny Reyes watched her every move. He saw the way she settled into her prone position, becoming part of the earth. She didn't just lie down. She integrated herself with the ground, a low, stable platform of bone and muscle. Her breathing was slow and rhythmic, the rise and fall of her back almost imperceptible. She wasn't looking through her scope yet. She was just watching, her naked eyes scanning the vast expanse. She was reading the story the landscape was telling her, the subtle shift of the grass, the lazy spiral of a dust devil 1,000 meters out, the way the heat haze danced and distorted the air at different distances. The Marines were reading data off a screen. She was reading the world. Reyes had served in Afghanistan and Iraq. He'd worked with scout snipers, MARSOC operators, and even a few legendary figures from Delta. He recognized the pattern. This wasn't a hobbyist. This was a master of an old and deadly art. The horn blared, signaling the range was hot. The Marines began their work, engaging targets at 1,000 and 1,500 meters. The sharp concussive crack of their .50 BMGs echoed across the plain. They were good, no doubt about it. Their shots were landing on steel with satisfying regularity, their spotters calling out corrections for the tricky crosswind. "2 clicks left, slight updraft," Davis yelled, settling in behind his rifle again. He was in his element, a confident warrior surrounded by the tools of his trade. After a particularly good string of hits, he glanced over at Alara's station. She hadn't fired a single shot. She was still lying there, motionless, her eye now pressed to the old brass scope. He shook his head, a dismissive smirk returning. "Guess she's just here to watch, boys." Reyes knew better. She wasn't just watching. She was waiting. A predator doesn't waste energy. It waits for the perfect moment, the precise alignment of conditions. He saw her left hand, tucked under the rifle's stock, making infinitesimal adjustments, her fingers reading the rifle's vibrations like a seismologist. He focused his own high-powered spotting scope on the air between her and the targets. He could see the mirage boiling, a river of heat flowing left to right. It was a shooter's nightmare, a constantly shifting variable that could push a bullet yards off course at extreme distances. Her lack of a modern ballistic computer wasn't a handicap, it was a statement. It meant she was doing all those complex calculations, windage, spin drift, Coriolis effect, air density, temperature, in her head. It seemed impossible. After another 20 minutes, the rangemaster's voice crackled over the PA system. "All right, shooters, for our final evolution, we're testing the new target retrieval system. The contingency target at 4,800 meters is now active. I repeat, 4,800 meters. This is an equipment test only. Do not engage." The Marines laughed. 4,800? That's 3 miles, one of them exclaimed. "You'd need a mortar for that." Davis looked through his scope, dialing his magnification to its maximum. He could barely make out the target, a tiny white speck shimmering in the distant heat. It was a hopeless, ridiculous distance. Then, a quiet voice cut through the air. "Tower, this is Finch on firing point 7. Request permission to engage the 4,800-meter target." The radio silence was deafening. Every Marine on the line stopped what they were doing and stared at the old woman. Davis's jaw hung open. He thought it had to be a joke. a sign of senility. "Ma'am," he said, his voice straining with disbelief. "You can't be serious. The bullet drop alone is over 1,000 feet. The wind will... It's not possible." Alara didn't turn or acknowledge him. Her focus was entirely downrange. She just repeated, her voice calm and steady, "Tower, requesting permission to engage." Up in the tower, Gunny Reyes felt a chill run down his spine. He had a choice. He could deny it, chalk it up to a confused civilian, and avoid any potential embarrassment or danger. Or he could trust the instinct that had kept him alive on a dozen deployments, the gut feeling that was screaming at him that he was about to witness something historic. He looked at the woman's form, a study in absolute stillness and focus. He saw the decades of discipline etched into her posture. He keyed his mic. "Firing point 7, you are clear to engage," he said, his own voice tight with anticipation. "All other shooters, cease fire, cease fire. The range is yours, Ms. Finch." A hush fell over the desert. The only sound was the wind. The young Marines all turned their expensive optics toward the distant speck of white, wanting to see the inevitable failure. Davis was practically vibrating with second-hand embarrassment for her. This was going to be a miss of epic proportions. Alara's movements were now glacially slow. She took a final look at the wind flags, then closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, they were clear and focused. She made a final tiny adjustment to the external dial on her scope. The click-click-click sound, unnaturally loud in the silence. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and then her whole body became utterly still. The world seemed to hold its breath with her. There was no visible movement, no flinch, no tremor. The rifle was not a tool in her hands, it was an extension of her will. The report, when it came, was unlike the sharp crack of the Marines' rifles. It was a deep, resonant boom that felt less like a sound and more like a pressure wave that rolled through your chest. It was the voice of pure power. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, but she absorbed the colossal recoil as if she were made of stone, her eye never leaving the scope, watching her own trace. Then came the wait. For a shot at that distance, the bullet's flight time is an eternity. 1 second, 2. The Marines were tracking the vapor trail through their scopes, a faint corkscrewing line arcing impossibly high into the sky. 3 seconds. 4. The bullet reached its apogee, hundreds of feet above the line of sight, and began its long descent. 5, 6. The wind took it, pushing it right, but Alara had accounted for that. 7, 8. It was a silent, invisible messenger on a journey of miles. Davis held his breath, waiting for the puff of dust 100 yards wide of the mark. 9, 10. 11 seconds after the shot, a flicker of movement near the target. A small cloud of dust kicked up from the ground just in front of it. Miss Davis started to exhale in a mix of relief and pity. But then, a 1/12 of a second later, the impossible happened. A bright flash erupted from the center of the tiny white speck. And 2 full seconds after that, the sound finally reached them. A faint metallic clang carried on the wind, the sound of a half-inch thick piece of hardened steel being punched by a massive projectile 3 miles away. Dead center. Absolute, profound silence descended upon the range. The Marines lowered their rifles, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. It was like watching a child skip a stone across an entire ocean. It defied the laws of physics as they understood them. Davis felt the blood drain from his face. All his training, all his technology, all his confidence was rendered utterly meaningless by what he had just witnessed. It wasn't just a great shot, it was a statement from God. Gunny Reyes slowly lowered his binoculars, his knuckles white. He didn't need to confirm the hit. He'd seen the impact flare right in the center of the target's mass. He had been a Marine for 22 years. He'd seen legendary shots in Fallujah, in Helmand, in places that didn't have names. He had never seen anything like this. This wasn't marksmanship. It was prophecy. He walked down from the tower and approached Alara's station. She was already calmly ejecting the spent casing, the smell of burnt powder hanging in the air. He stopped a few feet away, his mind racing. He looked at the rifle, and this time he saw it for what it was. Not an antique, but a masterpiece of purpose-built engineering. He noticed a small, faded insignia carved into the stock, nearly worn smooth. It was a ghost, a serpent eating its own tail around a single silent star. It was the mark of a unit that had been officially disbanded in the 1980s, a unit that had never officially existed. They were the whispers in the shadows of the Cold War, the deniable assets sent to do the impossible. They were phantoms, and he was standing in front of one. He drew himself to the position of attention. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with a deep and sudden reverence that startled the younger Marines. "Ma'am, that was the finest shot I have ever seen, or ever will." The young Marines, humbled and awestruck, approached as well. They moved with a new deference, their earlier arrogance completely stripped away. Corporal Davis stood before her, his face flushed with shame. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cracking, I apologize for my disrespect. I don't understand how—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the sheer scale of his ignorance. Alara finally looked up at him, and her eyes were not triumphant. They were kind, and a little sad. She pushed herself up to a sitting position, patting the stock of her rifle. "This rifle isn't ancient, Corporal. It's patient. You have computers that tell you what the wind is doing. This rifle and we learned to listen to it. Your equipment is excellent. But it's a tool. It can't replace understanding. You feel the wind on your face, you watch the dance of the heat, you become a part of the problem you're trying to solve. The shot isn't from the rifle. It's from here." She tapped her temple gently. "It happens in your mind long before you ever touch the trigger." She began to pack her gear, her movements as deliberate and graceful as before. The Marines watched in silence, their multi-thousand-dollar rifles suddenly feeling like clumsy, loud toys. They had been humbled not by a person, but by a standard of excellence they didn't even know existed. As she was closing the wooden case, the quietest of the Marines, Private Chen, spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "Ma'am, there's a name scratched into the scope mount. It says, Whisper. Is that the rifle's name?" Alara paused, her hand resting on the lid. A shadow of memory passed over her face. "No," she said softly. "That was my spotter's call sign, Sergeant Frank Miller. We were a team for 12 years. He could read a marriage like it was a book and call wind to the inch from 2 miles out. He made the calculations. I just pulled the trigger. He didn't make it back from our last deployment. This rifle, it's his legacy. I just come out here every now and then to make sure his voice isn't forgotten." She latched the case, the click echoing in the stillness. She stood, nodded to Gunny Reyes and then to the young, silent Marines. She walked back to her old pickup truck without another word, leaving behind the faint smell of gunpowder and the deafening sound of a lesson learned in the most profound way possible. Gunny Reyes and the Marines stood there for a long time, staring out at the impossible distance, the tiny steel plate glinting in the afternoon sun like a distant, silent star. They weren't just looking at a target anymore. They were looking at a testament to a level of dedication and silent service they had never imagined. That day, on a dusty range in the middle of nowhere, they learned that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield isn't the one with the most advanced technology, but the one wielded by a quiet master who has become one with their craft.